Today, we're going to rewind the clock back 3 years to the 2022 NFL Draft. You see, teams have until May 1st to figure out they want to use their fifth-year options on some of those former first-rounders, and we've actually already seen Derek Stingley get his extension. However, I want to look at each team's draft class as a whole and see how they did. We've got the tape, the stats, and the hindsight to grade how each of these franchises did, from breakout stars to total bust. We're breaking it all down team by team. To grade each of these teams, I'm looking at three different factors. First, could they find a superstar and or starters in the talent-laden part of the draft, being rounds 1 through 4? Secondly, did they find any meaningful players in the mid to late day 3 section, being rounds 5 through 7? And then lastly, I'm going to factor in trades in the early parts of the rounds and if they were fruitful. So hit that like button, become a bro, and subscribe, and buckle up. Let's see who struck gold and who found nothing. Special thanks to our friends over at Underdog Fantasy for sponsoring today's video. More on them a little bit later. To kick things off, we're going to start things with the NFC West. The Arizona Cardinals, they actually traded their first round pick to acquire not only a third round pick, but Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown over 2 seasons only had over 1,200 yards, 7 touchdowns. The whole idea was to reunite him with his former Oklahoma teammate and Kyler Murray. And unfortunately, injuries kind of played a role in that. So the trade didn't come off nearly as fruitful as you would hope. And they didn't really get a meaningful player with that extra third rounder, as they acquired you got Myjah Sanders, who I actually liked coming out of Cincinnati. Cameron Thomas, I believe, is no longer on the team. And really the only thing fruitful they got from this draft class ended up being Trey McBride, who's going to carry the weight for the grade here. And I'm going to give the Cardinals a C, with Trey McBride being a top 5 tight end in the NFL. Again, he's doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Moving on to the Los Angeles Rams, which this is another tricky one because, well, it deals with a lot of trades. So they didn't have their first rounder from the Matthew Stafford trade. And then during the season, they traded their second and third rounder to acquire Von Miller. Von Miller was only there for like half a season, but they did win a Super Bowl going into this draft off the backs of those trades. So it's going to really make the grade a little bit funky because they didn't really acquire much in rounds 1 through 4, seeing they only had a third and a fourth rounder. And Kobe Durant is the only guy still on the squad, and he kind of starts here and there. However, in rounds 5 and 6, they did get Kyron Williams, running back, and Quentin Lake, who's been a starter in the slot. So you did hit in the later rounds. Granted, that's pretty much it. And while you look at this draft class initially, and it's like, it's not a good draft class. You won a Super Bowl because of those trades. So it's going to make the grade a little interesting. I'm going to give them a B. Next is the Seattle Seahawks, and our first team that actually used their draft picks to draft players. And they actually got a lot of starters in this class, from left tackle Charles Cross, edge Boye Mafe, running back Ken Walker. You got Abraham Lucas at right tackle. Granted, he's been hurt, but when on the field, he's been a really good player. And then Kobe Bryant, who became a starter this season at the safety position. So they found starters at every pick from rounds 1 through 4. And then you go and look at what they did on rounds 5 through 7. And they found Reek Woolen, who I know it's kind of been up and down with him the last year, but that's a hell of a find. Find a starting outside corner in the later rounds, that's a hell of a pickup. And dude, even to mention, like, Derek Young's been a very solid special teamer. So the Seahawks did a hell of a job. They're going to get an A. And then there's the San Francisco 49ers, and things get funky once again because they traded their first round pick actually the year before to move up in the 2021 NFL draft to acquire Trey Lance, who ended up being a big bust. And we look at the rest of their draft and what they did in the early rounds, and they didn't find a starter. Drake Jackson, not a starter. Tyron Davis-Price, not on the team. Danny Gray, I don't even know if he's still on the team. I don't think he is. Spencer Burford, he started at moments, but for the most part, really just a depth player. Samuel Womack playing good football for the Colts. That's a 5th rounder though. And that's the thing. We get to the rounds 5 through 7. They literally didn't find a good player until round 7, Mr. Irrelevant, Brock Purdy, which drastically changes the grade because this is an F class. This is an F class if I ever saw it. But you used the final pick in the NFL draft and found essentially your franchise quarterback. So what do we do with that? At the end of the day, I'm going to give them a B-. They didn't find anything but a franchise quarterback in this class, but that means a hell of a lot. Moving on to the AFC West, we're going to start with the Denver Broncos. And once again, this was another team that traded their 1st round draft pick for Mr. Unlimited, who ended up being a terrible trade. And we are going to have that weigh heavily into their grade. But let's see what they did in rounds 2, 3, and 4, because they found Nick Bonito, who's been a hell of a starting player for that squad, a part of that rotation, getting a lot of pass rush. Greg Dulcich had moments his rookie year. Since then, nothing. Don't even think he's on the squad anymore. Damari Mathis is a solid depth player. You got Uzarike, who really hasn't seen a ton of time, but another guy who just provides some good depth from the interior. And then we get to rounds 5, 6, and 7. And really the only player of note here is Luke Wattenberg, who ends up being the team's starting center last year and actually does a hell of a job. So it's kind of a tricky thing grading this class, as you found a very good edge player, you found a starting center. Outside of that, not much of anything else. The Russell Wilson trade is really bad, kind of sucks. I'm going to give them a C-, but this is borderline like D+ territory. And then there's the Kansas City Chiefs, who drafted all of my favorite players. Trent McDuffie, he's a stud. He's going to get a fat contract. George Karlaftis has been a solid starter for them. Sky Moore ends up being a bust. Kind of is what it is. Brian Cook has been a starter. Granted, kind of had an up and down year last year. It hasn't really been the same since the ankle injury. Leo Chenal was my linebacker 1 in this class and went on the field. He has been very good. And then this is actually where the rest of their corner class is or the rest of their cornerback room is still on the squad. You got like Joshua Williams, who every now and then we'll see start in time. Jalen Watson was the starter early on, but it's been banged up. Nazeeh Johnson, who they got there in the 7th round, I think he saw the most snaps among those guys last season. So they're still on the squad. That's a big plus. That's depth. Isaiah Pacheco, how did he last this long? That's very solid running back. One of the most violent runners in the NFL. Just a hell of a fun player. They got a lot from this draft class. They really did. I think they hit it out of the park. Very few of their draft picks didn't really work out. Again, Sky Moore really being the only blemish in this draft class. So it's an A+. It's an easy A+. Then we have the Los Angeles Chargers, who were supposed to be drafting one of the most high floor players in the class in Zion Johnson. And unfortunately, he's been anything but. He's been very mediocre, and there's great case that he's in his final year with the squad. They're not going to pick up his 5th year option, and he's going to hit free agency just because he is consistently, you look at him and he's like, yeah, he could probably be like the 5th best player on an offensive line and you feel okay about it, but he might not be any more than that. And they didn't get much of anything else from this draft class when you look at it. Like Otito's still on the squad as kind of a rotation player on the defensive line. Jamari Sawyer at times started, but for the most part, he's a depth player. Jasir Taylor has split time in the slot. It's notable here that probably their best move in this draft was using their 2nd rounder to acquire Khalil Mack. So that's going to carry a lot of the weight for their grade. I think I'm going to end on them giving them a C. And then the last team in the division was the Las Vegas Raiders, who didn't have their first or second round draft pick because they acquired Davante Adams, who was really good for them for the time that they had him. He went for over 2,800 yards, 23 touchdowns. I know he's not on the squad no longer, but I would say that trade was worthwhile. The unfortunate part is they didn't get really much of anything else in this draft class. I mean, in the third round, Dylan Parham, you found a starting guard, and I think he's a solid starter at that. Fourth round, Zamir White, we were kind of hoping this past season would be the breakout year for him. It was not. And then you got a couple of guys who really aren't on the squad anymore, and Neil Farrell. I don't think Brennan Brown's there any longer. There, Mumford, you got a backup there, a depth player on the offensive line. So it's like, it's not all bad, but it's not all great. It's really unfortunate the Davante Adams thing didn't work out. A lot of that had to do with, well, instability at quarterback. So I'm going to give them a C. Leave it at that. Now let's jump to the NFC South, starting with the Atlanta Falcons, who used the 8th overall pick to get Drake London, who's likely going to get his option picked up. He's going to get extended. He's been a very solid receiver coming off a breakout season this past year. And then in the second round, they got Arnold Ebiketie, who is also coming off a career year, but it's leaving you 110 more. But you got 2 starters in the first 2 rounds. That's awesome. They had another second round pick in Troy Anderson. He hasn't really emerged to be much of anything, unfortunately. They did use their third rounder on Desmond Ridder, and I don't mind it. You're swinging on a quarterback, kind of is what it is. And he started games for him. It wasn't good, but he started games. They did have one more third round pick in D'Angelo Malone. I can't recall if he's even still on the squad. I believe he actually is still on the squad. He was kind of viewed as a DPR, designated pass rush only, so there wasn't a lot of expectation there anyway. But on day 3, you land Tyler Algier, who arguably could be a starting running back anywhere else. He's a very, very good running back. He's just happened to be behind Bijan Robinson, who is one of the best running backs in the league, in my opinion. So all in all, I think this is a solid draft for the Falcons. I'm going to go ahead and give them a B. Next, we have the Carolina Panthers, and we got to talk about the trade that caused them not to have a second. They traded a 4th as well, and it was to acquire Sam Darnold, which he started games for them in 2021 and 2022, but at the end of the day, it ended up not being worth it. And hey, man, Sam Darnold doing great, did great things this past season with the Vikings. Now he's going to be the starter with the Seattle Seahawks. Just wasn't meant to be for Carolina, I suppose. So let's just go ahead, get to their draft picks. And the only one that I believe is still on the squad is Kem Ikwanu. To be fair, Cade Mays is still there, and I think there's a good chance he might vie for the starting center job. But Ikwanu, there's been some ups and downs, but I think he's a relatively solid tackle in the NFL. Aside from that, Matt Corral, he's playing football in Canada now. Brandon Smith has been bouncing around. Like, they really got nothing of substance in this class outside of a above average starting tackle, which, hey, that's still a plus, but I'm still going to give this draft class a D. D plus to be nice. And then we have the New Orleans Saints, who made some moves. So they acquired 2 first-round picks from the Eagles in exchange for their first in this draft, as well as a first in 2023. I believe there was also a second rounder in 2024, along with a third rounder in 2022. So in this class, so they gave up some draft capital to acquire 2 first-round selections. And then they even moved up further, because keep in mind, those selections, I believe, were 16 and then 19, which they used on Trevor Penning. They moved up to go get Chris Olave, who's been a good player for them. Unfortunately, went through a bit of the concussion injuries last season, but Trevor Penning hasn't really worked out, whether it be the left side of the offensive line or the right side. He had some ups and downs last year. There was a little bit of promise, but still as a pass protector, he's leaving a lot to be desired. But hey, you got 2 starters there. You go to round 2, Alontae Taylor has been a very solid and flexible player for them, playing not only on the outside, but also being able to kick inside to the slot. Aside from that, they didn't really get much of else from this draft class. Because Trevor Penning's kind of been a big whiff. Lante Taylor's been a okay player. Chris Olave going through the concussion stuff, so you're kind of hoping he can return and produce for this squad. I'm going to give them a C+. And then we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who traded out of the first round, used the first pick of the second round to get Logan Hall, who is on the squad. That's probably the best way to put it. Luke Godecki, though, has had quite the arc there as he kicked into guard, didn't quite work, and then last year he was really good, I would say really solid at right tackle. Rashad White looked to be kind of the future running back there. Now he's more a part of the committee, but still I would say a worthwhile pick in the third round. And then at the top of the fourth round, they grabbed Cade Otton, who's I would say is a solid starting tight end in the NFL. They also drafted a punter. Why are we still drafting punters and kickers in the first 4 rounds? Beats me. You think teams would learn by now. Kind of is what it is. But they did also find a bit of a steal here in Zion McCollum in round 5. They chose to take the Tracy corner, develop him, and kind of had a breakout year last season. So all in all, I would say a very solid class. Did they get a superstar? No, but I just think they did a good job of drafting good players. So I'm just going to give them a B-. I got to give a special thanks to today's sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. If you sign up, download the app, use the promo code Broshmo. They match that first deposit up to $1,000 dues. They currently have best ball for the NFL. You can draft rookies right now, and best ball is probably one of the funnest ways to play fantasy football, or you can do higher or lower on player stats as they got basketball. The baseball's back. Yeah, baseball's back. So if you want to get in on some of the action, go ahead, download the app, sign up using promo code BROSHMO. But as always, play responsibly and play within your means. Moving to the AFC South, we got the Houston Texans, who knocked it out the park with the 3rd overall pick, getting Derek Stingley, who has just been a stud at the corner position. Got an extension just a few weeks ago, 3 years, $90 million. Good on him. Unfortunately, you can't say the same for pick 15, Kenyon Green, who the Texans actually moved back, allowed the Eagles to move up so they could go after Jordan Davis. They grabbed Kenyon Green, who's just kind of been a bust. Whenever he's on the field, he was bad, dealt with some injuries, and ironically, they ended up trading him back to the Eagles. So kind of weird how some things come full circle. But in round 2, they got Jalen Pitre, who's been a very good player, whether it be at safety or in the slot. After that, they acquired some solid depth players, I would say. John Mechie has been a solid wide receiver 4 or 5 for the squad. Christian Harris has been really depth at linebacker. He's had moments as a starter, though. Damian Pierce at running back. It looked like he had a very good rookie year, but couldn't really build off of the back of that. So at the end of the day, it's okay, cool. You got Derek Stingley, you got Jalen Pitre, but that's probably about it aside from some depth here and there. So I'm going to go ahead and give them a B+. And then we're going to get back into some shenanigans with the Indianapolis Colts as they traded their 1st round pick to acquire Carson Wentz, which, why were teams doing this in 2022? I don't know. But the remainder of their draft was actually pretty solid. Alec Pierce has been a solid, I would say, wide receiver 3, operating as kind of a speedy downfield threat. And then Jelani Woods, so unfortunate. This guy's had back-to-back season-ending injuries before the season even started, but there was a lot of potential with him there. So he's still on the squad. There's still hope, I suppose. Bernhard Raimann was one of my favorite players. I think I actually had a 1st-round grade on Bernhard Raimann. Saw him fall to the 3rd round. Been a very solid starter there at left tackle. Nick Cross was another one of my favorite guys in this class. Hasn't nearly seen the success that Raimann has, but I think he's been an adequate starter at safety, you would say, last season. After that, they have Drew Ogletree in the 6th round. He's still on the squad. He's currently going to be slated as a starter at tight end, and you're not happy about that. Then Ronnie Thomas is a depth player there at safety, though had a pretty solid rookie year. So it's kind of weird, kind of a funky draft class to grade. They had some hits. They had a very poor trade. So I think I'm going to give them a C+. The Jacksonville Jaguars had the first overall pick, and they selected Travon Walker over Aiden Hutchinson. And a normal GM would have that type of decision haunt them at night. But Trent Baalke gonna Trent Baalke, am I right? Walker has actually developed into a solid player. And you could say the same about Devin Lloyd, who they moved up into the first round to go grab. He's arguably probably the best player right now from this class. Luke Fortner was the starter his rookie year at center. At this point, he is a backup. Kind of is what it is. Chad Muma has been depth. You could really say Monteric Brown. He got some starts this past season, and he looks like solid depth. So it's like, honestly, it's not a bad class. So were you hoping to get a little bit more with the first overall pick? Yeah, well, you should have took Aiden Hutchinson, but Travon Walker's a good player, so it's hard to be hard on the Jags. I'm going to go ahead and give them a B. And then we got the Tennessee Titans. Woof, 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 woof. This was the draft that they traded A.J. Brown to the Philadelphia Eagles. With their other first-round pick, they actually traded out of the first round. So let's talk about Treylon Burks, man. Yeah, he had unfair expectations being the pick that they acquired for trading away A.J. Brown. And yeah, he's unfortunately been a bust. It can't really dodge that. Roger McCreary, though, he's been a solid player in the slot. Nicholas Petit-Frere, not so good. You're not so good. I mean, so much so they went out and were like, hey, Dan Moore, here's all this money this past offseason. Malik Willis is now a very solid backup player for the Green Bay Packers. Unfortunately, it didn't work out here in Tennessee. And then their fourth rounders, Hassan Haskins, wasn't a big fan of his coming into the draft. He's now elsewhere. And then Chigakonkwo, really liked him. He's, I would say, a solid tight end, starting tight end in the NFL. Outside of that, not much to say. Funny enough, Theo Jackson getting an extension with the Vikings this past offseason. Unfortunately, Kyle Phillips, he's elsewhere now, but he dealt with injuries early. So, like, at the end of the day, man, like, yeah, this is the draft class that you traded away A.J. Brown. And what did you get out of this draft class? Roger McCreary and Chigakonkwo. It's not a good feeling. I guess at the very least, Burks and Nicholas Petit-Frere are still on the squad. I'm going to go ahead and give them a D+. And now we're heading north in the NFC, starting with the Chicago Bears, who traded their first round draft pick in this class the year before to move up and acquire Justin Fields. I don't mind you trading future first round picks to take a swing at quarterback. It just really sucks when it doesn't work out. Unfortunately for the Bears, it didn't really work out, but I think they did a solid job with the remainder of their draft class. Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker have been very good starters in the NFL. Unfortunately, again, Brisker dealt with concussions last year, but Kyler Gordon is, I think, one of the more underappreciated slot players in the NFL. Velus Jones, I wasn't a big fan of the draft pick at the time. He's now no longer on the squad. Who would have thought? But Braxton Jones, you found a starting left tackle in the 5th round. Like, hell yeah. And we'll get to another team who found a starting left tackle with a much later pick in a little bit, but that Braxton Jones pick was pretty darn solid. I guess Doug Kramer's still on the squad, so there's a plus, but Elijah Hicks, I think, has been, when called upon, having to start, he's been good. But he's very much a very, very good special teamer. So, like, at the end of the day, I think it's a solid draft class. I don't mind the swing at quarterback the year before. It just sucks that it didn't work out. I'm going to give it a B. Got solid players. I think it's good. And then we're here with the Detroit Lions, who had Aiden Hutchinson fall into their laps, and he has been an utter superstar. Arguably would have been the defensive player of the year last year if he didn't get hurt. So, phenomenal pick there. They had another first-round pick with Jameson Williams, who looks like they're going to pick up the 5th-year option of, and kind of enjoyed a breakout campaign last season after some early career woes with some suspensions. But it's nice to see Williams working out. Josh Pascal is a depth player, kind of is what it is. But Kirby Joseph, you found one of the best safeties in the league in the 3rd round. That's a pretty big win if you are the Detroit Lions. They did find some notable depth players. Malcolm Rodriguez, who also spends a little time at fullback occasionally. And then James Houston's worth noting because he was so good as a DPR his rookie year. Like, I think he had like 7 or so sacks on like 150 snaps, but injuries ended up eventually getting released. Kind of sucks, but there's no taking away what he did his rookie season. This is just a phenomenal class. You found 2 superstars and Jameson Williams, who could be trending in that direction at the very least as a high-end wide receiver too. So I'm going to give it an A+. And then we have the Green Bay Packers, which is a draft class I don't know how to feel about. So they had 2 first-rounders. They had Quay Walker, meh. Devontae Wyatt, meh. And I was pretty confident in Devontae Wyatt coming out too. And yeah, he's just kind of been mediocre along with Quay Walker. So let's move to day 2 as they got Christian Watson, who has been banged up. He's coming off another injury. You got Sean Ryan, who stepped up this past season and arguably he's a pretty good starter at the guard. So it's nice to see that work out a few years later down the line. Romeo Doubs, unfortunately, like he's a pretty solid, I would say, wide receiver too. It's just injuries have played a big part for him, unfortunately. But Zach Tom comes in, starting right tackle. Hell yeah, you love to get that in the 4th round, but it didn't just stop there. Kingsley Enagbare has been a very solid depth player as a edge defender. And then you get Rashid Walker, who in the 7th round, you found a starting left tackle. Not only did you find your starting left tackle, but also your starting right tackle. And you found him in rounds 4 and 7. That's utterly insane. This is such a weird draft class because I feel like they whiffed it in the 1st round with their first 2 picks. But at the end of the day, it's a good draft class. I'm going to give it an A. And then you got the Minnesota Vikings, and I mean, I guess we got to just call it what it is. This was a very bad draft class. Lewis Seen ends up getting released. Andrew Booth, did he get traded or released? I believe he got traded to the Cowboys. Ed Ingram, he held on for a few years being a subpar starter at guard, and then he gets traded. The only guy I believe still on the roster are guys like Brian Asamoah, who is more of a special teamer. Caleb Evans, who I don't even think he's on the squad anymore, actually. So who cares? I guess Ty Chandler in the 5th round. He's stuck around. Like, your best player from this draft class is Jalen Naylor, who is a wide receiver 3. This was a bad draft. This is going to be the first F grade of the video, but I promise there will be more. Now we turn our attention to the AFC North, starting with the Baltimore Ravens, who knocked this sucker out of the park. They had 2 first-rounders, because keep in mind they were a part of that Hollywood Brown trade. And you landed Kyle Hamilton, which you could argue is the best safety in football, and then Tyler Linderbaum, who is like a top 5 center in the league. Hell yeah, that's how you make use of your assets. And then they grabbed David Ajabo in round 2, which injuries have played a big factor, unfortunately, in his career. But then you found a starting defensive tackle in Travis Jones, who's going to play there next to Matabuke. And you got Michael Pierce, who just retired. So Jones now stepping up into an even bigger role with the squad. He was a player that I quite liked from this draft class. Daniel Faalele, hey, he's a starter at the guard, at the right guard spot. Do you love it? Meh, kind of is what it is. They also grabbed Jalen Armour Davis, who, wildly enough, is still with the squad. So is Charlie Collier. I mean, their other 4th rounder here in Jordan Stout technically is the starter at punter. So, hey, I guess it can work out. It can work out with punters and kickers in the 4th round. Isaiah Likely, arguably, he is the starter over Mark Andrews at this point. But yeah, I mean, they had all these picks in the first 4 rounds. Even if some of them didn't work out, like a majority of them are either still on the squad or are starters. This was a phenomenal draft class, an absolute A+. Then we have the Cincinnati Bengals, which this draft kind of starts their run of just not drafting well, as they use the 31st pick on Dax Hill, which injuries have played a big role in it, but he hasn't really found a starting position, whether it's outside, in the slot, at safety. It's just kind of been unfortunate. And then Cam Taylor-Britt, who he's not a superstar, but I think he's a quality starting corner on the outside. So going on there in the 3rd round, Zachary Carter ends up being a not great. Cordell Volson, while still on the squad, still technically, I guess, a starter potentially, really not great. They just didn't get really anything from this draft class. I mean, granted, you got 3 starters, but you really love the quality of those starting players. Cam Taylor-Britt, you're probably happy with. The other 2, you're probably looking to upgrade, but at the very least, they got starters. I'm going to give them a C. And then we have the Cleveland Browns, who traded their 1st and 2nd round draft pick along with other draft capital to acquire Deshaun Watson, which will go down as one of the worst trades in NFL history. He just hasn't panned out for the franchise as a starting quarterback and brought that stigma along with them. And there was really no saving this draft class. And you look to round 3, Martin Emerson, promising rookie year. Since then, it's been very underwhelming. Alex Wright, David Bell, they end up as just depth players and really not much else. 4th round, you used a draft pick on a kicker. Why are we doing that again? And really, probably the best player from this draft class ends up being Jerome Ford, who stepped up as a star running back this year with Nick Chubb recovering from injury, and honestly is probably more of a committee back, more of a backup running back in the league. So you knew it was coming. It's a big fat F. Then to wrap up the AFC North, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers, who drafted their franchise quarterback, their Super Bowl winning quarterback, Kenny Pickett. Unfortunately, he would go on to win a Super Bowl with not the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it was more so in a backup role. So yeah, it ends up being a big bust pick for the Pittsburgh Steelers. At least you got George Pickens in this draft, even though he can be a bit diva-esque sometimes. DeMarvin Leal is not on the squad anymore. You got another wide receiver in Calvin Austin, who is, I would say, like a wide receiver 3 or 4. Does some fun things for you. Connor Hayward is still on the squad there playing with his brother, but like it's not a good draft class. I mean, George Pickens is kind of the saving grace here, and even that, it's like, is the headache worth it? I don't know. Maybe you could trade him and get good draft capital. We'll see. I think I'm going to just give this class a C. Next, with the NFC East, we got the Dallas Cowboys, who selected Tyler Smith with the 24th overall pick. And he started his rookie year at tackle, and I thought showed some promise. But then they moved him to guard. I was like, what are you doing? You got a solid tackle there. And it's like, well, we got an all-pro guard as well. So, hey, it all works out. He's a wonderful pick. And then they get Sam Williams in the 2nd round, which it's kind of been weird with him in Dallas. Like, he's had some moments. He's butted heads. Kind of is what it is. He got hurt. So it's been interesting nonetheless. Jalen Tolbert was a starter last year. It's really more of a wide receiver 3 or 4 in my opinion. But hey, 4th round, Jake Ferguson. I'd argue he's a starting top 10 tight end in the NFL. So awesome pick there. And I think they made, honestly, you found a good steal in Deron Bland, who set the record for pick sixes a couple of years ago, and a guy that could work inside and out. So yeah, that's a really good pickup there. Damone Clark, I thought it would be like he had moments as a starter, but for the most part looks like more of a depth guy. And I think that's fine. That's fine for a 5th round pick. So at the end of the day, this is a good draft class. You got a couple of superstar players in Tyler Smith and Deron Bland. I'm going to give it an A-. And then we have the New York Giants, who had 2 top 10 picks, with the first one being Kayvon Thibodeau, who's been a very good player, I would say. And then Evan Neal, who's been a total bust, unfortunately. And you look at actually the remainder of this draft class, and they got a few starters, fringe starters here and there. Wan'Dale Robinson, solid starter from the slot. Cordell Flott has started on the outside. I would say probably a better depth player. Daniel Bellinger's a good like tight end too. Micah McFadden's been a solid starter at linebacker. DJ Davidson has been a good depth player. So like you look at it, it's like, okay, it's a good draft class. You kind of wish you got a superstar with one of those top 10 picks. I think you could argue Kayvon Thibodeau, just not like more of a edge 2 than this elite top 10, top 15 edge in the league. I just don't think he's there. So I think it's a good draft class. I'm gonna go with the B+. Then we have the Philadelphia Eagles, who just draft well. They moved up to go get Jordan Davis, who I think has been a solid player for the Eagles. You got Cam Jurgens, who was the heir apparent for Jason Kelce, and he looks hella good. Nakobe Dean, when healthy, is a very solid starting linebacker in the NFL. They didn't have a 4th round pick because they did move up to go get Jordan Davis, but Grant Calcaterra is a solid like tight end too with the squad. So like for the most part, you hit on all of your picks. You went in and you just said, yeah, we're gonna just do a good job. We're gonna find starters, and with your first 3 picks, you found 3, and you could argue high-end starters in the NFL. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this an A. And then the Washington Commanders, they just didn't draft well, unfortunately. Jahan Dotson was a guy that they moved up to go get. Promising rookie year, turned into nothing. They ended up shipping him out. He's now with the Eagles. Cool. Fedarian Mathis was, to me, a very underwhelming pick in the 2nd round, and it proved to be as such, no longer on the squad. Brian Robinson ends up being the best player here, and I think they're going to let him hit free agency next year. He's had some injuries. He's a quality back, but he's the type of guy that you always feel like you could probably get a better player at some point. And then Percy Butler is still on the squad. Not that great, though. Didn't really get like Sam Howell, like you moved off of. Got him in the 5th. That was a bit of a steal, I think, for what he gave you. I know he ended up not being the franchise guy, but he had some fun starts at the very least. So, like, I don't want to give them an F, because it's just you missed on your picks. You hit on what, Brian Robinson? Like, I guess I'll give them a D-. Now let's wrap this sucker up with the AFC East Buffalo Bills, who whiffed on their first pick with Kaiir Elam, just traded him to the Cowboys this past off season, but then nailed everything after that. James Cook, hella good back in the NFL. Terrell Bernard just got an extension. Khalil Shakir just got an extension. I would argue Matt Ariza would probably still be their punter if he didn't have certain allegations that ended up not being true. But you go to the 6th round and you find a starting caliber corner, not just a starting caliber corner, a really good one at that, in Christian Benford. Like, it totally kind of makes up for Kaiir Elam being a bust. It's kind of wild. It's like, okay, yeah, we missed on our 1st round pick at corner, but at least we found a starter at corner in the 6th round. So it's a very interesting draft class nonetheless. It's a good draft. I'm going to give it an A-. I'm going to give it an A. And then we have my Miami Dolphins. Fins up, baby. Fins up. This is a crappy draft. I'm not going to take a long time with this. We traded our 1st and 2nd round pick for Tyreek Hill. He's still on the roster. He's really good. I'm okay with that. It kind of saves this draft class. Shannon Tyndall, I believe, is the only guy still on the roster from this squad. Our 3rd round pick, and he's not a starter. Everything else just kind of like we couldn't even find good depth guys. So I'm going to go ahead and give my Dolphins a D+. At the very least, we got Tyreek Hill, I suppose. New England Patriots had a very strange draft. Well, it was strange with their first round pick because they go Cole Strange, who ended up being like, oh, I can't believe he went in the first round. And while he's a starter, he's a pretty low end starter currently for the Patriots. And then you pair that up with like, okay, Tyquan Thornton, not even on the roster anymore, ends up being not a great pick. That was a reach. Marcus Jones, probably, I would argue, the best player from this draft class. As long as he, like, when he's healthy, he's a good slot player. He is, and special teamer. But Jack Jones, he ends up getting released after showing some promise with the Patriots, and now he's a starter for the Raiders. Pierre Strong, no longer on the roster. Bailey Zappi, no longer on the roster. We could talk about their mid to late day 3 picks, but it's irrelevant. None of these guys really on the roster. So, like, cool, you got Marcus Jones, you got Cole Strange. Like, you got low-end starters. That might be the only thing that saves this class. I'm going to give it a D-. And I want to end this video on a positive note. That's why we're finishing with the New York Jets, who had an utterly phenomenal draft. They had 3 first-round picks, did a lot of movement, got a Sauce Gardner with their 4th overall pick. He's a stud. Got Garrett Wilson with their 10th overall pick. He's a stud. He just needs quality quarterback play. Then they moved up to get Jermaine Johnson, who not a stud, solid player. Unfortunately, needs to stay healthy. Had the, I think it was ACL or Achilles injury. You can correct me in the comment section. But then in the 2nd round, they get Breece Hall, who for the upside could be a bit underwhelming because the production just hasn't quite been there. But I still think he's one of the better running backs in the NFL and could end up having a big season this upcoming year. Jeremy Rucker is currently penciled in as a starter at tight end, so that could be something in the 3rd round. Max Mitchell, good depth player. Like, I say good depth player. It's never good when he starts, but at the very least, he provides some depth. Michael Clemens, he has some moments. He's a good rotation player, so like, I think you would argue that they hit on all of their draft picks. Might be like, well, that 4th round pick in Max Mitchell, he's not good when he starts. He's only a depth guy. Yeah, 4th rounder, you got a depth guy. I think you should be okay with that. So like, this is an A+. It's an easy A+. But let me know your thoughts and maybe some of your grades in the comment section below. That's it for the video. And if you want more draft content, I don't know if you know this, I'm a draft channel. I'm currently pushing out my position rankings, my final position rankings for the 2025 NFL draft class. So go ahead, check that sucker out. But as always, until next time, you be easy, my friends. Later.